For a brief presentation, let me call forward Phyllis Heidemann, the president of March of the Living International, and David Macklis, the vice chairman of March of the Living International, and also Greg Peterson for his response. He's the co-founder of the Robert H. Jackson Center.
Because of the lateness of the hour and my terrible voice of laryngitis, I've been asked to speak briefly and quickly. I will do my best. My intention was to speak about the March of the Living and its link to Robert H. Jackson and the Robert Jackson Center that was established in 2001 to honor and continue the legacy of Justice Robert H. Jackson. We heard before the wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated and so devastated that civilization cannot tolerate them being ignored because it cannot survive them being repeated. They indeed have been repeated, but also have been ignored in greater and greater numbers. The ADL 2014 100 study, surveying people from 100 countries around the world, only 54% of those people polled globally have ever heard of the Shoah. But it gets even worse than that. Among those who have heard of the Shoah, 32% believe it is either a myth or has been greatly exaggerated. Being ignored assures they're being repeated. And that is why the March of the Living exists, to ensure that they are not ignored for the betterment of humankind. Justice Jackson indeed recognized that the Holocaust is not a Jewish issue, but it is a universal issue. We must learn from the past so that a more tolerant and just society will evolve for all humankind. Less than 8 months after Justice Jackson returned from Nuremberg, he was the guest of honor at a UJA New York dinner held at the Waldorf Astoria. And I tell you, there couldn't be a better fundraiser. There couldn't be a better fundraiser to help generate funds for the relief, rehabilitation, and resettlement of Jewish survivors. The goal for UJ in New York was to raise $65 million as part of a national campaign of raising $170 million. Here is Justice Robert H. Jackson, the fundraiser. They are hated aliens in the land where we now find them, and they have become unwelcome aliens in the lands from which they were taken. And there they are, huddled into camps where they cannot stay permanently, with no means to go elsewhere and no place open to them if they had the means to go elsewhere. Adequate justice to these surviving people can never be done, but to give them existing in suspense is a form of mental torture almost as harrowing as that which the Nazis inflicted. Just a moment regarding this $170 million. $170 million in 1946 at an average inflation rate of 3.54% over this period of 70 years was a nice sum of money. It was actually $1,900,000,000 rounded to the nearest million. A major objective of the march is to pay tribute to the courage of those who survived the Holocaust and who rebuilt their lives despite the haunting memories of the past. March of the Living, since its inception, has considered the survivors the most important element of the education program, and we indeed do speak of the 220,000 alumni as being witnesses of the witnesses. Continued briefly at this dinner and this fundraising event, Justice Jackson said, "The record of their persecution, enslavement, murder, and extermination is the blackest chapter in modern times. You know that anti-Semitism did not surrender in Germany. It is still virulent and ready when it dares to pursue the remnants of Jewry left there. You know, too, that anti-Semitism is not confined to the German side of the line, and that it afflicts those who live elsewhere in the world." Could that not be said today? Could that not be said today? Professor Elie Wiesel, as a keynote speaker at the March of the Living, made this profound statement: "We were convinced that anti-Semitism perished here. Anti-Semitism did not perish here. Its victims perished here." That same ADL study indicated 2 years ago, that study, 26% of the world's population indeed harbors anti-Semitic attitudes. The March of the Living strives to inspire our participants to commit to building a world free of oppression and intolerance, a world of freedom, democracy, and justice for all members of the human family. It is indeed most appropriate that we honor today the Robert H. Jackson Center for perpetuating the memory and legacy of Justice Robert H. Jackson for his legendary work in implementing justice with fairness and decency. That is the magnificent double entendre of Justice Jackson. Thank you.
Oh, yay. I'm not going to keep you any longer than absolutely necessary. I want to tell you two things. We at the March of the Living, I think you've gleaned today, those of you who are first-time visitors and participants, we are dedicated to memory, to the memory of our ancestors, to the memory of our past, to the memory of the acts against us and for us, on a positive note. We educate our students, as you have heard, to accept the future, to take their social responsibility, and to make sure that such a horrendous act never again occurs in history. I have a whole wonderful applauding speech about the March of the Living, which I'm not going to share with you today because you've heard everything that you need to hear. It is our responsibility, it is the legacy to our ancestors, those who perished and those who had the blessing to survive, that we take a stand, we never remain silent, we never forget, and we commit ourselves to always remember. We at the March of the Living are very grateful for the friends, the personal, individual, communal, and institutional friends that we have gathered and we have made around the world. The Robert H. Jackson Center, founded by Greg Peterson, has become a partner with the March of the Living. They carry our message, they believe in our mission, and together I believe we will make great inroads in the future. Where is... Greg, most of us in the room are very aware that the shofar is a call to action. Throughout history, the Jewish people have used the shofar not only to welcome in the Rosh Hashanah, the new year, but to call the people to action. We present you with love and thank you, gratefulness, and a great hope for the future, a shofar from the March of the Living International.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Let me stay up for the photographs.
Oh, to Mrs. Heidemann, Dr. Macklis, and all the representatives of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights and the university officials who have hosted this amazing event. Good news, Dr. Macklis called me a week ago, and he said, Greg, I got to remind you that the mind can absorb only what the rear can endure. So you have all of 5 minutes or less. So I'm going to take that to heart. I really am just so thrilled to accept this extreme honor on behalf of the Robert H. Jackson Center, which includes fellow board member Professor Barrett, who you heard earlier today. We have been so welcomed among all of these organizations, and especially Eli and to Dr. Macklis, who've extended themselves tremendously, as well as everybody else, on so many fronts. The mission of the Robert H. Jackson Center is to advance public awareness and appreciation of the principles of justice and rule of law as embodied in the achievement and legacy of Robert Jackson, a legacy which is manifested in his life story, recently portrayed in a PBS documentary, hopefully you'll have a chance to see it at some point, entitled Liberty Under Law, the Robert H. Jackson story, which highlights the fact that he is the answer for folks in America to the jeopardy question. Named the only person in the history of the United States to be Solicitor General, Attorney General, and a Justice of the Supreme Court. Amazing for a guy who never went to college, never graduated from law school, but he pulled himself up by the bootstraps, and you heard much about that today from Professor Barrett. But most importantly, his greatest achievement, as he wrote to several, was his time as the chief American prosecutor at the Nuremberg trial. Though I know it has been repeated several times, it's in the program, but let me repeat it again because it is so important. That 4 great nations, flushed with victory and stung, that 4 great nations flushed with victory and stung with injury stay the hand of vengeance and voluntarily submit their captive enemies to the judgment of the law is one of the most significant tributes that power has ever paid to reason. When it came to crimes against the Jews, he was the first to go out of its way to highlight this. And he said, let there be no misunderstanding about the charge of persecuting Jews. What we charge against these defendants is not those arrogances and pretensions which frequently accompany the intermingling of different peoples and which are likely, despite the honest efforts of government, to produce regrettable crimes and convulsions. It is my purpose to show a plan and a design to which all Nazis were fanatically committed to annihilate all Jewish people. These crimes were organized and promoted by the party leadership, executed and protected by the Nazi officials, as we shall convince you by written orders of the secret state police itself. The persecution of the Jews was a continuous and a deliberate policy. This speech, followed up by the evidence which was presented at the Nuremberg trial, certainly lays hollow any effects and opportunity of a Holocaust denier. Robert Jackson lived a life. Robert Jackson's rule of his life was that the rule of law is one he practiced in speech and in his activities. Dr. Michael Berenbaum, who was here earlier, and it was thrilled for me to catch up with him, gave pause to our, when we began in 2001, he came to the Jackson Center and said, he sat down and gave us 15 bullet points that we need to accomplish to make the Robert Jackson Center be effective. Foremost was the fact you got to underscore the message of the Nuremberg trial to its relevance today. We've attempted to do that on many fronts, but I see Prosecutor Ocampo here, and he joined us at our first International Humanitarian Law Dialogues. And the Robert H. Jackson Center has supported and continues to support 10 of those International Humanitarian Law Dialogues, with this year being in Nuremberg, where we'll pause and reflect on the legacy of the Nuremberg trial and its rule of law. And thank you, Professor Ocampo, for all of that encouragement. We look forward to enhancing the mission of the Robert H. Jackson Center by collaboration with many of the organizations which I've had the opportunity to meet, to help them in fighting indifference, racism, injustice, and advancing the high standard of recognition of the rule of law. As Justice Abella said, it's the just rule of law. The Robert H. Jackson Center envisions a global society where the universal principles of equality, fairness, and justice prevail. On behalf of the Robert H. Jackson Center, I want to thank you. I want to thank the March of the Living and all the related entities for all that they have accomplished and providing us with this extraordinary award, and we look forward to living up to the highest mission and standards of everyone here. Thank you very much.